What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Connect. Appreciate you guys all taking time out to come out on a Tuesday. And I'd like to throw a special shout out to our sponsors here, Arvum Plant Labs, for hosting the event tonight. We're going to be learning about leaf tissue analysis. Appreciate you guys. And I also want to say thank you for the host, Legacy Farms. Appreciate you guys having us here. Love the house. I'm sure you guys are enjoying having a venue here. It's very homey. Obviously, Brian, Shayna, Tyler, you guys are great. Thank you so much for everything. And guys, this is just the evolution, right? I'm sure the OGs that have been here started off at the brewery. We had a nice little reminiscence session earlier about that, Ziggy. And the evolution going to indoor sun hydro. The community is growing. The knowledge is sharing. It's valuable, guys, and that's really what we're here for. It's really to get everybody excited about how do we share our experiences, because we're the thought leaders in this space here. We're having a lot of experiences. We're sharing a lot of the solutions. That's what this is about. So as I got experience with Arvum Plant Labs, I'd never really utilized leaf tissue analysis. And so leaf tissue analysis is something that it just wasn't an accessible tool. I didn't really know about it, and it took way too long to get processed. So when I did find a resource, from traditional ag spaces, it just wasn't really effective. By the time that we actually got our results back, it was already too late. So when Arvum came across, I realized that there's a solution in time. We're dealing in time here, guys. So that's really where I was very impressed with the platform that Arvum had put out there, rapid tissue analysis. So again, that's why we were excited about having Arvum up here, was to explain what the solution is. It's all about quality production here, guys. So as we start to evolve and utilize a bunch of different tech, a lot of great resources can be coming available to us. So I'm happy and very honored to have Arvum Plant Labs here today to start to educate the community on how to utilize the platform and solution for leaf tissue analysis. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Adam Floyd, the founder of Arvum. Welcome, Adam. Come on up here, bud.
All right.
Get yourself set.
Thanks, brother.
I'm also going to invite up here Mr. Sam McGuire, also with Arvum. Welcome, Sam. And so I'm sure anybody that's been introduced on text message through Arvum, this is the guy that I'm linking you up with, Mr. Sam. And last but not least, we got Bobby Baggs, our Sacramento cultivation expert here. Welcome, Tim. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the. Oh, these about to have my clipper right here. Yeah.
What you got?
Seeds.
You guys ready? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you guys are going to share this one mic. You can use that one here, Tim.
Okay.
All right, Adam. So if you want to go ahead and give the crowd an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you. My name's Adam Floyd. I'm the CEO and founder of Arvum Plant Labs. I've been professionally in the cannabis industry for about 12 years, which makes me a geriatric. I've been involved in cannabis, basically my entire life. My parents were growers. I've been around cannabis. I love the plant. I'm obviously very passionate about it. And, it's just an honor to be here, and very excited to share with you guys today some of the things that, we offer as a company. And ultimately, we want everybody to be able to grow really fantastic, high-quality cannabis and get a huge yield and make shitloads of money. And also get really high.
Quality, baby. So let's go ahead and thumb through here. So why don't you go ahead and start us off? We're going to go through just a little brief session here, guys. We're going to go through the presentation first, 20, 30 minutes, which Adam's going to go through with us. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion while we're going through the panel. And then after that, we're going to open up for Q&A. So that's the fun part, guys. This is where we can really start to engage with you. If you have any questions, please start thinking about that, because I will be going around the room and moderating and allowing you guys to have the engagement with us here. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead and get started. Please. Okay, cool. So to kick things off, I want to talk about something that is really at the core of plant tissue analysis. And this idea was put forth by a guy named Justus von Liebig in 1840. And he's often been credited as the grandfather of fertilizer. And he came up with this concept of Liebig's law of the minimum, which is basically the idea that the local yield of terrestrial plants, whether it's tomatoes, flowers, cannabis, whatever, should be limited by the nutrient that is present in the environment to the least quantity relative to its demands for plant growth. And what that means is that if you have everything in your cultivation in perfect harmony, but you're deficient in one area, your yield is going to be impacted by that. The analogy that I often use is imagine that you build bicycles. You can have 10,000 frames, you can have 20,000 tires, you can have 20,000 pedals, but if you only have 2 handlebars, you can ever only build 2 bicycles. And that same concept applies to plant yield. I don't know if any of you ever had the experience of very big, beautiful, lush-looking plants that don't get you the yield that you want. And that can be caused by a micronutrient deficiency. They can be caused by certain things being in toxic levels, and so on and so forth. So a single factor in your cultivation can greatly impact your yield. He visualized this concept with what he called Liebig's barrel. And the idea behind this is that each one of these staves represents a single factor in your cultivation. Whether it's light, humidity, temperature, CO2, potassium, calcium, nitrogen, whatever it is, each one of those staves of the barrel represents some important factor in your plant's ability to grow and produce its maximum yield. The way he visualized this was the water level inside that barrel. And the lowest stave is going to be the limitation in your ability to yield from your crops. So, even if you have everything in perfect harmony, as you can see from this visualization, there's one thing that's going to limit your ability for that plant to produce its genetic potential. We've run probably close to 20,000 tissue tests now. There's 3 primary categories to plant nutrient primary nutrients, which are nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, which everybody's the big numbers on the label of your fertilizer bottles. Everybody's intricately familiar with NPK. Secondary nutrients, calcium and magnesium. CalMag for years has been the go-to fix in cultivations, right? My shit's fucked up. CalMag. Everything CalMag, right? Yes. You all are laughing because you know it's true. The biggest overlooked secondary nutrient is sulfur, which is equally as important to calcium and magnesium. In addition to that, there's a whole battery of micronutrients. A lot of times, micronutrient supplements come in one bottle, right? Are those optimized for cannabis? Maybe, maybe not. But molybdenum is equally as important to your plant's ability to produce high-quality cannabis as nitrogen. There's also many other auxiliary factors in where yields end up: light, temperature, humidity, CO2, plant growth regulators, what's present in the soil, your soil microbiome, so on and so forth. So it is a overly, there is a lot of factors that go into this. However, from a nutritional standpoint, it's very important that all of these important nutrients are in an ideal concentration. So I like to look at plant cultivation as from a holistic viewpoint, right? And so again, like I talked about earlier, all of these things play important factors in your plant's ability to grow. And so by only looking at tissue testing, only looking at soil testing, or only looking at water testing, you're getting one piece of the puzzle. And there's a bunch of pieces to really paint a quality picture of what's going on inside your plant. Start with soil health. Even if you grow in substrate, in cocoa, in rock wool, whatever it is, this is the environment that your plant's roots live and die in, right? So it's important to understand what's going on. It's the barrier between your fertilization and your plant being able to uptake those nutrients. For example, if your soil pH is massively out of whack, you may have the most perfect fertilizer solution on the planet, but it's not going to get absorbed, right? If you have, high salt content in your soil, whatever it is, it can be massively influential. So it's important to do substrate testing. It's not as important, in my opinion, as leaf tissue analysis, which is really truly the smoking gun, and I'll get into in explicit detail here in a minute, but it is very important, right? The other important factor in this sort of realm is your style of fertilization. If you talk to 100 different growers, they've got 100 different ways of growing. I'm a big fan of a combination of organic and inorganic nutrients. So in an inorganic form, salt-based minerals, this is the form in which your plants are able to uptake nutrients. Nitrate, ammonium, phosphate, these are the things that cross that barrier in the root zone and are able to be uptaken by the plant. The way that I typically grow is with an organic backbone and feeding mineral nutrients on top of that. It's not the only way to do it, of course, but those are important factors in your cultivation. Soil fertilization ties right into this, re-amending your soil. This is why soil tests are very important before you plant. If you are an in-ground soil grower, if you're a pot, if you grow in pots, whatever it is, substrate testing is very critically important before you plant, before you really get your grow kicked off. Carbon is another important factor that people oftentimes overlook. I'm not a big fan of throwing my soil out. One, because I'm a massive cheap ass, and two, because you probably don't need to, right? But people, and especially as the price of cannabis has dropped. When I first started in this industry, we sold truckloads of soil. People would just throw that shit out and they go buy more. It was great, right? Cannabis isn't $4,000 a pound anymore. So people have to be cognizant of their expenses. One of the biggest things that is removed from soil year after year, grow after grow, is carbon content, right? It's digested by microbes. It's utilized by the plant. That breaks down, you can get soil compaction. Biochar, something that I'm very into at the moment. This is a scanning electron micrograph of biochar. It creates this incredible structure for microbes, right? Your soil microbiome is incredibly important if you're a soil grower. Nutrient lockout, so this ties right into soil pH. Right? There's two primary causes of nutrient lockout: incompatible pH and incompatible nutrients. Calcium and phosphorus, when they're in solution together in high concentrations, they precipitate out as a solid, calcium phosphate, which is what your bones are made of. Thankfully, our bones aren't water soluble. We'd be in big trouble. So when those precipitate out, it's a one-way reaction. It's like cooking an egg. You can't uncook an egg, right? Well, you can actually. It's very difficult. But that's not the point. The point is that if you get concentrated nutrients, you can get solid precipitate and you can get lockout, right? You guys paid a lot of money for those expensive hydroponic nutrients. You don't want them as an insoluble solid. Another important thing to look at, and this ties directly into tissue testing, and part of why we test in very specific ways, is mobile and immobile nutrients. Certain nutrients like nitrate, the plant is able to shunt those to where it's needed. So you may have big, beautiful green growth up at the top of your plant and dying, yellowing leaves down at the bottom. And while that may not trigger in your mind that that's a deficiency in nitrogen, it may very well be. So if you see your lower canopy leaves, showing signs of deficiency, and your upper canopy leaves showing signs, of a nice, healthy plant, it's likely indicative of this plant moving nutrients around to new growth. So now we get to the fun part, which is plant tissue testing. This is the smoking gun in your cultivation, where we're going to be able to tell you how things are going. It's much like an MRI, right? If I have some horrific pain in my stomach, I don't know what that is, right? If I go to a doctor and I get an MRI, they may be able to tell me. Much like our testing, we can take these leaves and we can give you empirical data. It's non-feeling, right? We digest that sample, we run it through our instrumentation. We can give you a snapshot of where those nutrient levels are in your plant. What works so well with this is it can lead us into solving your problem fundamentally, right? So we can tell one thing when we do these tests, like if these nutrient levels are out of whack, we'll be able to say, okay, well, definitively we know your potassium's low, your nitrogen's high, and your copper's excessive. Then we can work backwards from that information to help correct those deficiencies in your grow. This is pretty great. Our lab director put this together. We actually reached out to the person that published this paper and asked them permission to use it in this presentation, and they said no, so we did it anyway. No, I'm just kidding. They did say yes. So each one of these plants is exhibiting a specific mineral nutrient deficiency. you can see that several of them exhibit yellowing of the leaves, dry crinkling at the end, right? I don't know which nutrient deficiency that is. I don't know if you've ever been in a grow where people have stood around pointing at the plant going, oh, it's molybdenum, it's nitrogen, you need to do this, you need to do that, right? But as you can see from the next slide, each one of these is its own mineral nutrient deficiency, and a lot of them kind of look similar, right? So how do we know for sure what it is? And that's the power of doing plant tissue testing. Another very important thing to note is that these mineral nutrient deficiencies don't actually show up as physical symptoms until between 3 and 9 weeks from when they start to occur. So if you start testing early, we can actually catch this in time and rectify the issue. Because if you wait 9 weeks to see chlorosis on your leaves from an iron deficiency, it may be too late to really correct that, right? And you could impact your yields by 30% or more. So if you start testing early, we can actually catch these things. We had a client who's had an employee that fed 10 times the rate of calcium that they were supposed to. We caught it a week before they started showing symptoms. The customer said, I don't think that this data is correct. And we said, okay, we'll run it again. Called us 2 days later and said, all my plants are starting to die. Please help me. We said, okay, well, we caught this deficiency before they could even see it physically manifest. Soil testing, very important early on in the cultivation for some of the reasons that I talked about earlier. So you don't need to do an excessive amount of soil testing, but it is important, whether it's soil, rock wool, cocoa, whatever you're growing as a substrate, it's important to do that. It helps us paint a picture of what is exactly occurring. Same thing with water analysis. So we like to test the input, the outflow, and your nutrient stock tank solution. Those 3 pieces of information, along with leaf tissue analysis and soil testing, can paint a very, very good picture of where problems may be occurring in your cultivation. Now, we're going to talk about understanding the results that you get. I worked with traditional ag labs for years, which is where the genesis of Arvum came from. Our average turnaround time, a very fast lab, was 5 to 7 days. Most of the labs were between 21 and 24 days before we got data back. Approximately half of them would send us physical results in the mail, right? This is not 1981, it's 2023. You should be able to get things through email. You should have a platform in which to access this data. So built into our platform, which I'll get into soon, there's target nutrient ranges for all these. But if you look at this deficiency and toxicity nutrient response curve, you can see that there's a fairly narrow window where you're really hitting your maximum potential yield. And more is not always better, right? Like whenever I get sick, I just chug NyQuil till I get better. Not the best idea, right? Same thing, it's just like, don't put more nutrients. Sometimes that's the problem, right? So too much isn't always, gonna solve your problem. Too little, of course, can cause problems as well. So we wanna be in this, what they call the luxury consumption zone. On the right of this, you see this is our certificate of analysis. This is what you receive for every sample. We provide a lab score of the results and tell you where your issues are occurring. In this particular sample, we have excessive calcium. We've got high manganese and deficient zinc. So many commercial hydroponic fertilizers tend to have imbalanced micronutrients particularly. And the biggest issue we see with secondary nutrients is sulfur deficiency, right? Very rarely, in fact, I can't think of a single thing that comes to mind where I've seen sulfur toxicity. Very rare. People tend to massively underfeed sulfur. We also have you can look at your data in this viewpoint as well. You can actually export all of this as a CSV. So if you have your own internal, database or whatever, you can export this stuff directly. You can work directly through our application, and you can see that each one of the values is color-coded to indicate whether it's deficient, low, in range, excessive, and high. We also have a very cool data analytics visualization tool. where you can actually look at this data over, by strain. You can look at it, by week, whatever it is, and you can actually see the adjustments that you make take effect in your plant in real time, right? So by the time we receive a sample, we typically have data to you within 48 hours. We do it faster, but we need 24 hours to dry the plant tissue down to completion. This is a really, really cool tool because if you do weekly testing or bi-weekly testing and you flip from vegetation into flower, you can actually see these values as you change your nutrient regimen. You can see these values start to adjust themselves, which is a very powerful tool. In traditional ag, they typically do plant tissue testing 1 to 2 times a year. They go, okay, this area is deficient in phosphorus. I'm going to take a couple more bags of phosphorus and dump it on that field next year. And that's about the extent of it. For cannabis cultivation, we need things quickly, right? And that was kind of the big motivation in building this lab to having very quick turnaround times. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process itself. It's pretty interesting. I won't get too deep into it. But we use so we get your plant tissue, we dry it down to completion, so that way we're on an even playing field with everything. So it's totally dry, devoid of moisture. We put it into a microwave digestion system where it completely obliterates the matrix. It comes out as a nice colorless liquid. And we're going to take that and we dilute it down with water. And we put it onto our next instrument, which is called an inductively coupled plasma optical emission spectrometer. There'll be a quiz at the end, so take notes. And basically what this does is we suck the sample up that we've digested through an argon plasma. So plasma is ionized gas. The plasma inside that instrument is hotter than the surface of the sun. As each one of those analytes, the iron, the copper, whatever it is, as they pass through that plasma, they're going to move into an elevated state. And as they move to the cooler part of the plasma, they're going to move back into a relaxed state, and discrete wavelengths of light are emitted. We use a charge capture device, which is what's in your phone, to take pictures, and we can actually measure each one of these discrete wavelengths of light. So we're able to do the majority of the periodic table in one shot, which is pretty cool. So we can collect information on roughly 80 elements on the periodic table. And so you can see that these, sodium, nitrogen, hydrogen, right, they have very distinctive wavelengths that we can measure that no other element emits. What that does for us is allows us to go down to very low levels and be incredibly precise in our results. Nitrogen's the only problem child. The atmosphere is made of 71% nitrogen, so we have to use a combustion analyzer that's devoid of oxygen to get good nitrogen values. Not nearly as exciting. So in conclusion, regular soil and plant tissue testing can identify problems early. They can save you money on fertilizers, right? Very rarely in this industry do people under-fertilize. And most of the time, we're able to see fairly significant increases in yields. So we've worked with customers that have seen a 30% or greater increase in yield. I obviously can't promise you that we'll get you there, but almost universally, people either save money on fertilizers, increase yields, or both.
So Adam, one of my biggest questions is timing.
Uh-huh.
When do you test? What are some optimal timeframes for testing?
Yeah, so we start with the mothers if you're doing cloning. Right early into veg is, and then the timing on that, the minimum recommendation that we provide is every 2 weeks. We have customers that test with us twice a week. So one of our biggest clients, we pick up from them Mondays and Thursdays. When we pick up Monday, we have their data ready for Wednesday. They adjust their fertilizer formulation Thursday morning and feed their plants. They take tissue samples that afternoon, and we're able to collect data, twice a week for them. That's very granular. In general, the more data points that you have, the better off you are. But you should test, at least every 2 weeks throughout your whole cultivation cycle from beginning to end.
That's a great point because I'm new to testing, right? I want to start to implement some sort of tissue testing program into my regimen. Where and why do I start? At what point? Obviously, you touched on the nursery side of it, but when I'm going into flower, am I in week 1 through 3? At what point am I hitting those stages for testing?
So it kind of depends on your facility and your grow style, but we typically say, let's get a day 0 test, just get a baseline, see where we're at. And then we like to take it 2 weeks out from there through the end of the cycle, because it gives us a lot of information about A, what's going on, B, any issues that come up, and then C, if we see these issues, we're gonna go back and add a little more in there. We're gonna take your water test, we're gonna take your media test to try to figure out what those issues are. But it kind of depends on the style. Actually, the client Adam was talking about is actually testing samples every single day with us. They're growing outdoor in native living soil. And they're trying to basically do the analysis to see when the plant is requesting these different nutrients so that they can then strategize for future plantings, essentially what this needs at very specific days. Because if you're doing testing every day, which we don't recommend to most clients, you can actually see those demand shifts in the data, which is pretty cool. And the reason we're excited about this is because I was a cultivator since 2009, and I started because I was in a pretty crazy accident. You can probably tell by my eye, I wanted weed to smoke, and I didn't like paying for it. So I just taught myself. Did it in a little shed from Home Depot, turned it into a garage, and then we had a licensed grow down in Moss Landing. We never had this level of insight into what was actually going on. And Adam mentioned you put 4 cultivators in a room to try to figure out what's going on. You're going to have 4 different answers most of the time.
Just add a little more CalMag.
Add a little more CalMag. That was always we joke about it, but I mean, Botanicare has most of my money, I think, among some others. But this enables you to not have any confusion. There's no speculation back and forth, and that's why we really like it. And getting in there on those 2-week intervals really puts you in a proactive position, if that makes sense.
Okay, so first off, I just want to say you did a killer job, because this material can be so boring, and you did such a great job. I kid you not. That was a killer job.
Let's get a little round of applause for Adam. That was some dense material.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
That wasn't just making a joke. That was really good. Right on. So I'm a consultant in the Sacramento area. We've worked together, over probably about a year or so. We've been working together. And Arvum is a really good, a very useful tool in my arsenal when I step into a new cultivation, just to get that baseline, right? To see where everything is at. What are the nutrients doing? What's it look like? How are the plants? And just getting that really fine granular look. So I really appreciate these guys, because I feel like they've leveled me up in certain areas of my cultivation strategy. And coming into grows that you don't know, and you don't exactly know the environments, don't exactly know the cultivars, they are, they're really a secret weapon. So appreciate it. Sam's met me on the side of the highway before, so they do whatever they need to get the sample from you, by the way. So I just figured I'd throw out a few things that I'm running into currently. So one thing that I know there's probably more than just me, there's probably a couple people in this room that are struggling with, is the temperature of their water going into their plants, right? Their feed temperature, right? Because I know a lot of people are trying to keep those water temps cool. Some people have, HVAC in their water rooms. A lot don't. So I was wondering, because we're seeing at a couple different facilities, we're seeing pathogen pressure increase rapidly, especially a couple weeks ago when we had the 110 degree, 5-day spell, whatever that was. All of a sudden that next week, things just exploded, right? Fusarium, Pythium, everything just kind of exploded. And I think we all are at the point where we know that those pressures are in our facilities. It's just what is going to cause that to uptick. And did we forget to do a root drench, or is it water temp? So my question to you guys is, and I haven't done this with you guys, do you guys test for pathogens, or do you have a way of sending off leaf tissue and sending in some root ball analysis just to make sure, that nothing else is funky in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do in-house pathogen testing. We also work with some partner labs that have more extensive panels than we do. To get started on pathogen testing, it can be quite expensive.
Yeah,
so they typically have a minimum order requirement. So we had a customer that was like, I want to do Pythium testing with you every week. And we're like, okay, awesome, cool. And we ordered $5,000 worth of kits, and they never ordered a single sample. So we do hop latent viroid in-house.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can do that. We do Fusarium as well. Okay. anything, and then we've got some really great partner labs that we recommend, but we can help facilitate that absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we'll probably be in touch after this.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's, if you get to the point where you're identifying it with your eyes, like you're no reason, there's no way to help you. That harvest is probably where it is. My second, thing that comes to mind when I talk to you guys is, we're in a world of like high EC cultivation, right? And, some fertilizers are meant to be run at high ECs and some are not. That's real. I see a lot of people pushing liquid lines extremely high and not really understanding what is making up that EC. And so a lot of times, and I don't fancy myself any better than the grower, in the audience, anybody else, but sometimes it's those little things that like just knowing that bit where like that nutrient line shouldn't be run at 3.5, right? It probably shouldn't, because what gets it to 3.5, well, now you're toxic, right?
Right.
Or you've disturbed that relationship between, calcium and magnesium, or phosphorus and, calcium, all these, how everything works together, obviously. So I was just wondering if you've seen any of that, like an uptick in that, or like, what is your usual, like, you said earlier that like most people aren't under fertilizing. So you're seeing more of the opposite, which is very costly.
No, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, first of all, you're probably flushing a ton of money down the drain, literally, right? But if I go out and I get salt water and I put an EC probe in there, it's going to give me a reading of 3,500 parts per million approximately. The pH of that water is going to be right around 6.4. Wow, that seems great to fertilize my plants with, right?
You're not far off.
Yeah, but no, you don't want to put salt water on your plants, right? So EC is a measurement of electrical conductivity inside your fertilization solution. It does not differentiate, unless you have ion selective probes, what that EC is made up of. We can actually test your nutrient solution and tell you not only exactly what's in it, but where it may be deficient, where it may be excessive. And I've always been of the mind to fertilize more frequently with a less concentrated solution. It's always worked really well for me. I've worked with some people that are like, I hit that twice a week with super high EC and then just water the rest of the time. It's like, okay, well. So, what you're going to end up doing is just flushing a lot of money down the drain. But that, super great question. High EC is not necessarily indicative of a quality fertilization solution.
And
appreciate that.
Just to add on to that a bit, the other thing too is you need to understand what the plant needs. Like there might be the instruction that says feed it at 3.5. That's why we encourage people to do these tissue analysis, because you have an objective result that's telling you, are you too high or are you too low? Like what we want to do is basically eliminate the speculation around plant nutrition and have objective data that you guys can operate off of, so you can make those moves and be informed as you're doing it, if that makes sense. So like the instruction is one thing, but what the plant needs, can be different from strain to strain or facility to facility. So using that plant tissue test in conjunction with probably starting at that instructed level as a baseline will let you know where you need to go, if you're too high or too low, if that makes sense.
It really does, and especially when we're going through the phenohunt validation process. You make your initial selection, now it's time to dial it in, right? So what are we doing at that point? So really understanding what that plant's needs are early on it's like, I always think of tissue analysis as looking in the rearview mirror to determine where you're going to drive in the future.
100%. And the other interesting thing, like coming from your perspective too, is bringing in new genetics in your facility. I feel like there's always a learning curve with that. I come from the days of like pheno hunting in our facility, popping seeds, finding one that works, then kind of spending the next 6-8 months really dialing it in until we're stoked to get it out in the market. And if you're doing tissue analysis through that process with these new strains, you eliminate a lot of that learning curve where you're trying to figure out based off of visual cues and then your final yield and your terp results, if that strain's worth keeping around. You're growing it at the optimal level right off the bat. First run with that new pheno, you're dialing it in, and then you're able to kind of figure out, is it a keeper or not, much more quickly. And then once you have that recipe, you can then take that next round and just run with it, essentially.
And this is where the power of the dashboard comes into play, right? You
Exactly.
can export that data into CSV, and we can nerd out all day long about how to analyze data and really being able to apply it towards future progeny of breeding projects. Because really understanding the lineage or really understanding the tendency of those sisters is going to help with the selection process, especially if you're starting to go down and crossbreeding other things too. So it's a very powerful tool. So thank you guys again for that platform itself. It's amazing.
Are you able to go back to that slide?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I've used a ton of labs over the years, and most of them, like Adam said, they take 2 weeks, and I had to drive back down to Sacramento to get the damn results. And then one time there was a guy over here. This is a real story. I think I got my water tested and my soil tested, drove all the way down from El Dorado County, showed up, and he was like, "Oh, you marked the wrong box, so you're not going to get the result you want." And I'd already paid, and he like laughed about it, and like the office chick's like mortified, like he does this all the time, right? And of course I had checked like tomatoes or something, right? It was back in 2015, and so anyway, I drove all the way down here, spent half my day, and I was just looking at this old like water nerd dude, and he was just like, he just felt so good that he got over on me, and I was just like, that put such a sour taste in my mouth when it came to testing, right? Just that person just being very, I don't know, plant people are very nice, but then there's like the agronomists that are like, no.
Scientists are pretty weird.
Yeah.
Being one, I know.
You guys. So when Sergio turned me onto Arvum. When I saw this dashboard, I was like, okay, I can read this, right? Like you don't have to spend hours trying to figure out what the hell your plant needs. It's right here in red, like, deficient, right? And then excessive is blue, right, guys?
Blue is low. I'm sorry, blue's high.
Blue's high.
Yeah.
High, excessive in red, healthy, right? Deficient in red as well. So it just really, really helped, just simplify, right? We don't have a lot of time. We're working with limited crews, we're trying to throw a 7-day, 365-day, plant, right? Our job into 5 days now because most of us we have to work 9 to 5 and do all that jazz because of Prop 64, it's great. Anyway, we're working on very limited time. So once I saw this dashboard, I was like, okay, these guys understand cannabis. They understand cultivation. They understand what we need. And that's what really, and you guys' price points are great. Your turnaround time is just ridiculous. It's just awesome. So.
And serviceability, guys. You're very approachable.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, again, Tim touched on this earlier about just it's hard to do business with other traditional labs. And so you guys really brought a whole element of service to this. Again, it was very comforting knowing that I had so many questions about it because it was foreign to me. I didn't know what the hell I was asking or what I even needed to do. So just getting that sample kit, you're like, dude, just try it. We'll let you know if there's any problems. So I encourage everybody to grab their sample kit on the way out because that's your first run. That's your complimentary run to try out Arvum. And just to make sure that you do get that experience with it to see it for yourself.
Yeah, just find the second best looking guy at Arvum, and he will give you a free test kit of 5 samples.
Want to expand on that? So,
What about you being the second best?
I thought that was you. No. So one of the other things, we could sit up here and talk about this all day long. But for us, and the reason we brought these kits is because you're going to have an aha moment if you come and work with us where this is all going to make sense. And that's why I'm still excited about doing this over a year after I started, is having those aha moments where it all kind of clicks. And the other thing that I can expand that Tim was saying is in our platform, there's the reporting and analytics section. We find new ways that people are using that all the time that we didn't even think about. Everything from tracking strain compatibility. So if you're, strategizing how you're going to plant your facility, you can do that by grouping strains with similar nutrient demands. So you can put everything in there that's got the same demands, and you're going to have a better run. I know we've probably all had runs where you have 4 tables, 4 different strains, 3 of them are banging, and 1 is just completely deficient. At least when I was growing, I would have those issues. You're always trying to play catch up with something. You can level the playing field both from an understanding standpoint, but then from a strategy standpoint too. So we encourage everyone. There's a free kit in here. You literally just have to pluck leaves, put it in a bag. There's a prepaid envelope in there to mail them back to us. And then to expand too, part of what we do is we don't just send you these results and say, all right, figure it out. Adam and I and our whole team, we're available 7 days a week. here and there. But we're available. You can reach out, and we're going to walk through these issues with you. Like, we worked with a client at Tim's at one point who was trying to do something very specific and bring out very specific colors at the end of flower. Adam, Tim, and I all got on the phone, and we were able to kind of work together on a formulation to meet what he was trying to do. So that's the level of detail we get into with clients, where we'll get on there and we'll walk through exactly what you're doing. We'll use our knowledge, Adam's knowledge, the whole team to basically do what we can to optimize that plant health. So yeah, grab a kit, send us some samples, we'll take care of you. And if this conversation today didn't make a lot of sense, when you get on the phone with us with some actual data from your facility, it will all come together. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. That was wonderful. And great job on the content. So, guys, this is it. I would love to open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Get out there, Serge. Find
Right
him.
over here. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So, name and where you're from.
Brian from SoCal. So question is sourcing your media, for example, cocoa or soil or whatever, I mean, rock wool, should you test it prior to planting?
Yes, absolutely. And I used to manufacture soil. And let me tell you, while it's theoretically all created equal, it certainly is not. Right? And so, we would have hot batches. We had a batch that no nitrogen got put into it. And we were right in the middle of being sold to Scott's Miracle-Gro. And they freaked out about it. So it's really important that you just get a baseline understanding of what you're putting your plant in, right? So one $75 test can potentially save you tens of thousands of dollars, right?
That's a great question. And this kind of goes back to preventative testing for pathogens as well, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. We're doing preventative maintenance on our plants. We're about to commit to these plants. So if you're going in to test your substrate or you're testing your plant material for whatever might be going on, it's a great question, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me piggyback on that really
Please.
quick. Something that Adam brought to my attention, because I mix, there's a lot of people who are starting to mix their own fertilizers, right? They're starting to understand the relationships, right? So I make my own, and a couple of clients use it. Anyway, it's a fun process, but something that the first time I talked to Adam, it was like 45 minutes, and I had so many more questions for him afterwards. Is testing your inputs, right? Like, test your inputs if you are making your own fertilizer, or even you may use a base, from whoever, a powder base or liquid base, doesn't matter. But if you're adding anything on your own, make sure you're getting that tested, because especially post 2020, I think we all understand that production is just not where it was. Quality control is really not where it was. And so I, very much am testing what is going into my batch and then going to the plants, right? So very, very important. Something like, it seems so common sense, but as soon as he said it, I was like, I'm not doing that. And that's sketchy, right? That's a flip of a coin now.
Yeah.
And that's not okay, because I can piss some clients off really fast.
Yeah.
Really fast.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Like, when you buy a commercial fertilizer and you look at the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium values, and calcium, magnesium, and stuff, those are guaranteed minimums, right? So the states do not care about maximums. All they care, what it is, it's a guaranteed analysis. So if you pick up a bottle of CalMag and it's a 1% nitrogen, 8% calcium, 4% magnesium, that 1% nitrogen is a lie, right? It's probably more like 4.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And they don't put that on there because they don't want it to seem like there's excessive nitrogen in the CalMag. Calcium and magnesium nitrate are the cheapest sources of CalMag. Most fertilizer manufacturers use these. So while you may be thinking that your formulation is dialed in based off of what you're reading off a label, that very much may not be the case.
Can I expand on that a little bit too? The other thing that we've kind of noticed from doing a lot of this testing is we do testing for nutrient manufacturers, both for clients that have sent us a sample of what they're using and from the actual manufacturers themselves. I'm not going to name names. Everyone has issues here and there, but there's variability from batch to batch too. So if you buy a pallet of nutrient A, whatever the manufacturer may be, from batch to batch, we see fluctuations sometimes that are pretty significant. So if you're used to formulating with that initial batch that you bought a pallet of 6 months ago, you reorder. There might be a significant enough difference in the levels contained in that nutrient where you're going to start seeing issues. And also with things like the war in Ukraine, there's all of these other factors that have come into play with sourcing a lot of the raw elements. So we have people who've been sourcing their own iron. It had like 1% cadmium in the iron, and he was having cadmium fails in final flour, which is super rare. Like it's not something, and I've been on the lab, I was at SC Labs for a number of years too. It's not something we see a lot, but we've definitely seen more of as the supply chain issues have started to impact the cannabis industry.
I got one for you. I got a batch of mag sulfate, lead, and tiny bit of arsenic. That was a good one.
Yep.
Yeah. We would have failed our entire facility because it was a pallet's worth, and it was more of like a little top off of Epsom. Here's a little more, So it would have lasted us forever, and it would have popped the entire facility for, anyway. And like Sam touched on it, the war in Ukraine has actually upset a ton of quality manufacturing. So I would say it's even more risky now than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
No, absolutely. And then if you're using like a dry powdered mix, if you think about the micronutrients, right? Like you're sprinkling maybe a gram or two into a 50-pound bag, it's not homogeneous, right? It's just not. And so, if you're scooping out of that, you may be getting no iron, and then the next scoop might be tons of iron, right? So, the cost of our test is fairly low priced. And, like we were talking about earlier, Sam and I and the rest of our team are readily accessible. So, we're always happy to help. I love solving problems. I love talking about weed. I love growing weed, so I love talking about science. So, the only thing is if you call me, I might not ever shut up. So,
Question: Can you actually can you ship samples from out of state?
You can. That's a great question. So we worked with, we talked with USPS, and we actually technically only deal with hemp because the leaf tissues themselves are less than 0.3% THC. So we're technically a hemp testing lab, right? So we do accept samples from everywhere.
What other questions?
Yeah, good.
Over here.
Chris from Weed Between the
I
Lines.
got you, bud. Hold up.
Chris from Weed Between the Wines. Do you find different cultivars reacting differently or quicker, bouncing back when you do the different regimens?
Yeah, yep. So on our roadmap, we're going to look at doing genetic testing in combination with this. So to answer your question, yeah, absolutely, right? So strains can be very, the range between strains' ability to uptake nutrients, what their nutrient demands are, can be substantial. When we first kicked this off, we said, okay, well, we'll ask people, what are you growing? Blue Dream, cool. We'll compile all this data for Blue Dream. Well, the problem was that my Blue Dream and your Blue Dream and his Blue Dream and his Blue Dream are all 4 totally different plants, right? So that wasn't really helpful. So we're in the process of rolling out some genetic testing to be able to correlate those things, right? And say, okay, well, this really is, this strain of Blue Dream, and this ties into its nutrient-specific demands. But yeah, absolutely, it's something, and all of our target values are compiled from tens of thousands of data points, and so they're ranges, right? And it's not like if you have 4.999% nitrogen, you're deficient and all your plants are going to die, and if you have 5.001, you're going to be fine, right? It's a gradient. Yeah. Sam?
That's
a good idea.
Just rip
Yeah.
one open for you right now. So essentially, when you open this, it's
Adam,
gonna
would you
come
mind getting
with
the
our-
mic? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that, guys. So it's going to come with our pre-addressed, prepaid return envelope for this event today. It's going to come with our sample bags inside and some instructions.
But wait, there's more.
We have some instructions on basically how to take the analysis and then some instructions on how to get you set up There's a QR code at the bottom that you can scan. Takes you right to our registration page, and then it's as simple as plucking 5 fan leaves per sample, spraying them with some RO water, drying those leaves off, bagging them up, putting them in this bubble mailer, and sticking that in the mail to us. And 48 hours after we get those samples, you'll have results.
Yeah, and you do need to make an account on the website,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So that you can visualize your data on there.
The question was, what if you don't have RO water available?
Okay. If you don't have RO water, the reason that we recommend, so I'll answer your question in a second. So the reason that we recommend rinsing the leaves is early on we had people that would foliar spray, and then they'd cut their leaves and send to us, and it'd be like, holy shit, you've got 13% calcium. Your whole facility is going to die, right? So if you don't have RO water, that's ideal. You can rinse it with tap water. And if you don't foliar spray, it's not as big of a deal. But we did run into an issue where people would foliar spray, they'd cut their plants, and we'd get data that made no sense, which is why we recommend that.
That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
And also, we have a video that we just posted on the Instagram page for the Connect community of how to properly take a sample. It's like 45 seconds long. It's a great reference point. Shout out to Sam for the modeling on that. It came out great. What other questions? Any last final thoughts?
No, just thank you so much, Sergio. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate, it's an honor to be here with all you, and thank you for listening to me ramble for 40 minutes. So much appreciated. And
That was killer.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's a total honor to be here. Having an absolute blast. So
Appreciate you. Thank you, Adam. And I'd also like to say thank you to our other sponsors. We got Legacy Farms, Indoor Sun Hydro, Copert, Arroya, My Flora DNA, Friendo, Cultivated Genetics, Justified, and the Bacon Mania food truck. So if you guys haven't gotten some food yet, please be sure you get fed on the way out. Appreciate you guys coming out to the Connect. We'll see you next month.